After selling my house, I gathered my children to share the money. When I said I'd keep a little for my old age, my son ripped the envelope away. "You don't need it, Mom. It's for my wife's apartment." I just smiled. Because when they came back from the real estate office, they couldn't utter a single word. Their faces said everything. They'd learned their lesson. I thought I was just splitting money with my kids, but when my son grabbed the envelope and said, "You'll manage," I decided to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Wait till you see their faces at the end. After 30 years in the same house where I raised my kids, painted the kitchen 3 times, and lost more socks than I care to admit, I finally sold it. The paperwork was signed, the moving boxes were stacked, and my heart was a mix of nostalgia and excitement. I'll be honest, I never thought I'd see the day. That house had been my anchor through storms and sunshine. The backdrop to birthday parties, scraped knees, and late-night talks over cups of tea. I could still picture David and Lisa running down the hallway in their pajamas, giggling and shrieking, their little feet thumping on the old wooden floors. And now here I was standing in a new, much smaller kitchen, surrounded by boxes labeled fragile and mom stuff, trying to convince myself that this was a fresh start, not just an ending. The day after the sale, I invited David and Lisa over. I wanted to do things right, to be fair, and to make sure everyone felt included. I'd always tried to be a good mother, the kind who listened and put her children first. Maybe sometimes too much so, but that's what mothers do, isn't it? We give, and we hope it's enough. I made coffee strong the way David likes it, and set out a plate of those store-bought cookies Lisa pretends not to like, but always eats anyway. We sat around my tiny new kitchen table, the 3 of us, with an envelope full of cash sitting right in the middle. It felt almost surreal, like we were playing Monopoly, except this was real money and the stakes were so much higher. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's divide this fairly, but I'd like to keep a little for my old age, for emergencies or maybe a cruise." I tried to keep it light, to make a joke out of it, but the truth was I was scared. I'd never been on my own before, not really. I'd always had the house, the kids, the routine. Now I was facing a future that felt both wide open and terrifyingly uncertain. I thought maybe, just maybe, my children would understand that. But before I could even finish my sentence, David reached across the table and snatched the envelope right out of my hands. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. One moment I was holding on to the last bit of security I had, and the next it was gone. David's face was set, determined, almost impatient. "No, Mom," he said, his voice sharp. "I promised to buy an apartment for my wife. You have a pension, you'll manage." For a moment I just sat there, stunned. Did he really just say that? Was I invisible or just a walking ATM with gray hair? I looked at Lisa, hoping for some support, but she just stared at the table, her hands folded in her lap. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I could feel my cheeks burning, a mix of embarrassment and anger rising up inside me. I wanted to say something to protest, but the words caught in my throat. How do you tell your own child that you feel betrayed, that you're hurt? Not just by what they did, but by what it says about how they see you. I tried to remind myself that David had always been impulsive, always quick to act before thinking things through. He was the kind of kid who would jump into the deep end without checking if there was water in the pool. But this was different. This wasn't a scraped knee or a broken window. This was my future, my security, and he'd taken it without a second thought. I wondered if he even realized what he'd done, or if he was so caught up in his own plans that he couldn't see past them. Lisa finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine for just a second. There was something there. Regret maybe, or guilt, but she didn't say anything. I could tell she wanted to, but she held back. Maybe she didn't want to get in the middle. Or maybe she was just as shocked as I was. Either way, I felt completely alone sitting at that table with my 2 grown children, realizing that the roles had somehow reversed. I was the one asking for understanding, for a little bit of kindness, and they were the ones holding all the cards. The rest of the conversation was a blur. David talked about the apartment he wanted to buy, how it was a good investment, how his wife deserved a nice place to live. Lisa nodded along, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. I tried to listen, to be supportive, but all I could think about was how quickly things had changed. One minute I was the mother, the provider, the one in charge. The next I was just an afterthought, someone to be managed and placated. When they left, I sat alone in my new kitchen, staring at the empty envelope on the table. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, followed by a surge of determination. Maybe I was older, maybe I didn't have the house anymore, but I wasn't done yet. I still had a few tricks up my sleeve. And as I sat there, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone, not even my own children, decide my future for me, not without a fight. I'll be honest. I wanted to yell, cry, maybe even throw a shoe. But instead, I just sat there silent. Sometimes silence is louder than words, isn't it? The kind of silence that fills a room and makes the air feel heavy, like you're breathing through a wet wool blanket. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling just a little as I tried to process what had just happened. My own son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep and bandaged up after every scraped knee, had just looked me in the eye and told me in so many words that my needs didn't matter. That I'd manage, as if I were some old dog who could be left to fend for herself. Lisa looked at me, her eyes wide and uncertain, but she didn't say a word either. I could see the conflict on her face. She wanted to comfort me, to say something, but she was caught in the crossfire, unsure of which side to take. The room felt colder than my ex-husband's heart, and trust me, that's saying something. If you've ever been through a divorce, you know exactly what I mean. I glanced around at the boxes stacked in the corners, the half-unpacked dishes, the faded family photos. I hadn't found the courage to hang up yet. This was supposed to be a new beginning, but right now it felt more like an ending. David and his wife left for the real estate office, practically skipping out the door. I could hear their laughter echoing down the hallway, their voices bright and excited as they talked about paint colors and furniture. It stung hearing them so happy while I sat there, feeling like I'd just been robbed. Not just of money, but of dignity, of respect. I replayed David's words over and over in my mind. You have a pension, you'll manage. As if that was all I needed. As if a pension could replace the security of a home. The comfort of knowing I had something set aside for emergencies, or even just a little fun in my golden years. Ladies, have you ever felt like you were being pushed aside? Like your needs suddenly didn't matter? I was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of running out of money, and honestly, scared of what my own son had become. I'd always prided myself on raising my children to be kind, to be thoughtful, to look out for family. But at that moment, I wondered where I'd gone wrong. Had I given too much? Had I made it too easy for them to take me for granted? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. Lisa lingered for a moment after David left, hovering in the doorway like she wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. I caught her eye and tried to smile, but it felt forced, brittle. "It's fine, honey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Go on, you don't want to be late." She hesitated, then nodded, her shoulders slumping as she slipped out the door. And just like that, I was alone. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty envelope, my mind racing. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, the late nights, the double shifts, the times I'd gone without so the kids could have what they needed. I thought about the dreams I'd put on hold, the vacations I'd never taken, the hobbies I'd never had time for. And now, when I finally had a chance to do something for myself, to set aside a little nest egg for the future, it was gone in an instant. I got up and wandered through the apartment, touching the walls, the countertops, the window sills. Everything felt unfamiliar, like I was a guest in someone else's home. I tried to picture what my life would look like now. Would I be able to make ends meet on my pension? Would I have to go back to work even though my knees ached and my back protested every time I bent down? Would I end up one of those women you see in the grocery store, counting out change at the register, hoping she has enough for milk and bread? The fear was real, and it settled in my chest like a stone. But underneath the fear, there was something else. A spark of anger, of determination. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I'd survived worse than this. I'd weathered storms, both literal and figurative, and come out the other side stronger. Maybe I didn't have the house anymore, or the envelope full of cash, but I still had my wits, my experience, and a stubborn streak a mile wide. I made myself a cup of tea, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a hot cup of tea can't fix everything, but it sure doesn't hurt. I sat back down at the table and let the steam warm my face. I thought about what I wanted, about what I deserved. I wasn't asking for much, just a little security, a little respect, a little acknowledgement that my life still mattered. As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let David's thoughtlessness define my future. I wasn't going to let fear win. I would find a way to stand up for myself, to reclaim my voice, even if it meant having some uncomfortable conversations. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that silence might be loud. But it's not the end of the story. Not for me. And as I sat there sipping my tea, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. A chance to rediscover who I was and to remind my children and myself that I was still here, still strong, and still deserving of a little happiness. But here's the thing about us moms. We're tougher than we look. We don't just sit around waiting for life to happen to us. We've weathered storms, patched up scraped knees, and learned to stretch a dollar further than most people can imagine. So as I sat in my quiet apartment, the sting of David's words still fresh, I let myself feel the hurt for a moment longer. Then, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and decided it was time to do what I've always done, take care of myself. I poured another cup of tea and stared out the window, watching the world go by. I thought about all the times I'd put my children first, all the sacrifices I'd made, and how somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to look out for myself. Well, not anymore. If David wanted to treat me like a doormat, he was about to find out that this doormat had a few tricks up her sleeve. While David and his wife were off at the real estate office, probably picking out curtains and arguing over paint colors, I made a few calls. I started with my lawyer, a lovely woman named Carol, who's about my age and has a no-nonsense attitude I've always admired. I explained the situation, my voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as I spoke. Carol listened, then chuckled. "Honey, you're still the owner. Nothing happens without your signature. They can't do a thing unless you say so." That was all I needed to hear. I felt a surge of relief mixed with a little bit of mischief. I called the real estate agent next just to confirm. Sure enough, the apartment David wanted to buy was still in my name. The sale couldn't go through without my approval. I hung up the phone, feeling lighter than I had in days. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had some control over my own life. I spent the rest of the afternoon tidying up, humming to myself as I dusted and rearranged the few knickknacks I'd brought from the old house. I even found the courage to hang up a few family photos, though I put David's a little further back on the shelf than usual. Call it petty, but it made me smile. I set the table for one, made myself a nice dinner, and even opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. If this wasn't a special occasion, I don't know what was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard the familiar sound of keys in the lock. David and his wife burst through the door, their faces flushed with excitement. They were talking a mile a minute, barely pausing for breath. "Mom, you won't believe it. The apartment is perfect. It's got a balcony and the kitchen is huge." And David stopped mid-sentence when he saw me sitting at the table, calm as can be, sipping my tea. There was a beat of silence. His wife's smile faltered, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected to see a stack of keys or a pile of paperwork waiting for her. David's brow furrowed. "Where's the contract, Mom? The agent said you'd be bringing it over." I took another sip of tea, savoring the moment. "Oh, I spoke to the agent," I said, my voice steady. "Turns out nothing can happen without my say-so, and since no one bothered to ask me what I wanted, I decided to hold off on signing anything." David's jaw dropped. His wife looked like she'd seen a ghost. For a moment, no one said a word. I could almost hear the gears turning in David's head as he tried to process what was happening. I just smiled. The kind of smile that says, "Nice try, kiddo. Mom, you can't be serious." David finally sputtered. "We already told everyone we were moving in. We picked out furniture. We held up a hand, cutting him off. David, I love you. I love your wife. But I'm not just a bank account or a signature on a piece of paper. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be treated with respect. You took that envelope without asking, without even considering what I might need. That's not how this works." His wife opened her mouth to protest, but I shook my head. "I'm not saying no forever. I'm saying we need to have a real conversation about what's fair, about what I need, and about how we move forward as a family. I'm not going to be pushed aside. Not by anyone." The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't the same as before. This time I felt powerful. I felt seen. David looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a long while. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes that maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated his old mom. I stood up, gathering my empty teacup. "Next time, maybe ask before you take," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a crossword puzzle calling my name." As I walked out of the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being silent. I was done letting fear and guilt dictate my choices. From now on, I was going to stand up for myself, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone else. And as I settled into my favorite chair, pen in hand, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best twists in life are the ones you write for yourself. After the shock wore off, the apartment was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. David and his wife sat across from me, their faces a mix of embarrassment and disbelief, while Lisa hovered by the window, arms crossed, watching the whole scene unfold. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for David, almost. But then I remembered how quickly he'd snatched that envelope, how easily he dismissed my needs. And I knew this conversation was long overdue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of unspoken words pressing on my chest. "David," I started, my voice softer than I expected. "Do you have any idea how much it hurt to hear you say I'd manage? I know you're excited about your new life, and I want you to be happy, but I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I deserve a little respect and a little security for my golden years." I tried to keep my tone gentle, but there was steel underneath. I'd spent too many years putting everyone else first, and I wasn't about to let myself fade into the background now. David looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his wedding ring. His wife glanced at him, then at me, her expression softening. Lisa finally spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "David, Mom's right. We've all leaned on her for so long. I think we forgot she has her own life, her own dreams. It's not fair to just assume she'll always be there to bail us out." She shot me a small, supportive smile, and I felt a rush of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were actually talking, really talking, not just skimming the surface of things. The conversation that followed was raw and honest. We talked about the past, about all the times I'd put my own needs aside for the sake of the family. I told them about my fears, about being alone, about running out of money, about losing my sense of purpose. Now that the house was gone and the kids were grown, I admitted that I'd been scared to speak up, worried that if I did, I'd come across as selfish or ungrateful. But I also told them how proud I was of them, how much I wanted them to be happy, and how I hoped they'd understand that I needed to look out for myself. Too, David listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't in years. I could see the realization dawning on his face, the slow understanding that I wasn't just his mother. I was a person with hopes and fears and dreams of my own. He apologized, his voice thick with emotion, and promised to do better. His wife nodded, squeezing his hand, and even Lisa wiped away a tear or two. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. In the end, we split the money fairly. I kept enough for myself, enough to cover emergencies, to give me a little cushion, and yes, maybe even enough for that cruise I'd always dreamed about. I could practically hear the ocean calling my name, and let me tell you, the thought of sipping a margarita on the deck while someone else did the cooking was enough to make me giddy. David and his wife got their apartment, but they had to wait a little longer and work a little harder for it. Lisa, ever the peacemaker, made sure everyone walked away with their dignity intact. But the real gift wasn't the money, it was the lesson. David learned about gratitude, about the importance of seeing the people who love you as more than just a safety net. Lisa learned that sometimes the best way to support someone is to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. And I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. In fact, it might just be the best gift you can give your kids, because when they see you valuing yourself, they learn to value you too. We even managed to find a little laughter in the midst of it all. At one point, David joked about how he'd never try to outsmart me again, and Lisa teased him about getting schooled by Mom. I told them I'd always have a few tricks up my sleeve, and we all laughed, the tension finally melting away. It felt good. Better than good, actually. It felt like family. As the evening wore on and the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized how much lighter I felt. The fear and anger that had weighed me down were gone, replaced by a sense of peace and possibility. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, and I knew deep down that I'd never let myself be pushed aside again.